Are some people naturally immune to COVID?
Mr. Reagan.
Okay, so I'm doing some research for a different video. Through my research, I found this article that was posted today, I guess yesterday by the time this video goes out. It says that researchers have been intentionally trying to infect people, give them COVID, volunteers, in order to study its effects and to try to figure out how to better treat COVID or better guard against COVID or whatever. And what they found was that a lot of the participants could not catch COVID. They could not give it to them. They were putting COVID directly into their nasal canal. I don't know what the official term for that is. But these people couldn't contract it. They couldn't get it, right? And you may have not been vaccinated. You may have not taken any kind of precautions. You may have gone to parties during the pandemic. You may have done all these things and never caught COVID. You might think, man, I don't even understand why this is a pandemic. I've been going around, no big deal, and I've been fine. I've never been able to catch COVID. And a lot of people have noticed that people who have been vaccinated can catch COVID, can get COVID, and they seem to have an almost stronger susceptibility to catching COVID than do some people who have never been vaccinated or have never caught it. And that seems bizarre. Like, how is that reasonable? And so some people have surmised that, well, maybe the vaccine itself makes you more susceptible to catching COVID, or maybe it causes COVID or something like this. I've never really thought that. That hasn't made sense to me. But it is weird. It is weird that some people who get vaccinated seem to catch COVID, and some people who are never vaccinated never catch COVID. But this could explain it. And what these doctors have surmised is that maybe there's a certain percentage of the population that, without ever contracting COVID, without ever getting vaccinated, just has a natural immunity to COVID. And if that's the case, if a certain percentage of the population does have this kind of natural immunity, then did we ever need vaccine mandates at all? It's an important question, and I'm going to dive into it in one moment. First, I have to sell you something. It's tax season, and I just paid tens of thousands of dollars for my crypto investment gains. Never again. I just learned that there is a way that my capital gains could go tax-free legally, and I can do it through My Digital Money. With My Digital Money, you can buy and sell cryptocurrencies through a crypto IRA. Yes, you can buy and sell cryptos as much as you want and not pay taxes. And we all know just how big those gains can be. Last year, Ethereum gained 450%, and with a My Digital Money crypto IRA account, you don't have to pay taxes on that. And here is the best part. My Digital Money is giving away $50 to new cash accounts, no questions asked. Just use the account MDM50. Go to mydigitalmoney.com and open a cash account now to get your free $50. That's mydigitalmoney.com. All right, so I've pulled up the article here, and I'm going to read the article to you guys. This was published in Bloomberg yesterday. It was republished in the Washington Post. So this is not like right-wing publications. These are left-wing publications, solidly left-wing publications, talking about people having a natural immunity to COVID. This is not conspiracy theory. This is not, my wishful thinking. These are leftists here reporting science, apparently. In fact, the woman who wrote this article, her name is Faye Flam. She's a Bloomberg opinion columnist, and she's the host of a podcast called Follow the Science. All right, so let's have a look at this. This article is entitled, Immune to COVID? It's possible, but a medical mystery. Even when doctors intentionally infected volunteers with COVID, only half the group got sick. Half. There's a photo here with the caption, "Some people are hard to infect." One of the more astonishing things that scientists learned from deliberately exposing volunteers to COVID-19 was that nearly half of them never got infected, even when the virus is introduced directly into their noses. More surprising still, these were people who hadn't been previously infected or vaccinated. This so-called challenge trial was originally conceived as a way to speed up vaccine testing, but ended up as a window into the dynamics of the virus. 2 years into the pandemic, about half of Americans still haven't had a documented infection, according to some estimates. Without more in-depth study, it's hard to know how many tested positive on antigen tests at home, had asymptomatic infections, or perhaps had mild ones that they brushed off as a cold without getting tested. But the challenge trial and studies of household contacts show some people are hard to infect. In one study, only 38% of unvaccinated people living with an infected person caught the virus. That number was 25% for the vaccinated, which raises the question of who is vulnerable to this latest wave, driven by the Omicron subvariant BA.2, which is starting to cause cases to rise in the northeastern United States. Experts quoted in last week's New York Times estimated 45% of Americans had COVID-19 during the Omicron wave, and therefore assumed that the other 55% would be vulnerable to BA.2. But it's probably not that simple. People who should be vulnerable are not getting infected, and those who should be immune to Omicron are getting reinfected. And the data from the challenge study and household contacts reveal there's something more than just being careful and vaccinated that's separating those who are getting infected and reinfected from those who remain COVID-free. And what's really bizarre here is that I feel like a lot of us had a kind of intuition about this. You know what I mean? I think there were a lot of Americans who just said, I'm not really that worried. I don't think that this is going to hurt me. I don't think that I'm going to get a bad infection. I think I'll be fine. And, a lot of that had to do with the fact that the early accounts of COVID infections showed that really the only people that were dying or being hospitalized were very old people and people with what they call comorbidities, right? People who were already very, very sick. And then there were people who were very overweight. We figured out that those people tended to have severe reactions. But if you were young and you were healthy, there really wasn't that much of a risk of dying or going to the hospital. That's what it seemed like to many of us, and so most of us weren't that worried. But I do think that it was more than that. I think people had this kind of intuition about it beyond just those numbers, because I think even before they were talking about that stuff, a lot of us were like, I'm not that worried about it. And I think that there was just this sense that some people have that they're like, I just don't think that I'm going to be susceptible to this. I don't know what that intuition is. I don't know how people kind of knew that. Maybe it's just recklessness, but a lot of people felt like it wasn't going to be a big deal for them, and it really wasn't. And it's funny because you have this kind of religious adherence to mask wearing on the left. You have this kind of religious adherence to social distancing and to quarantining and to all this kind of stuff. And a lot of those people, a lot of the people who are obsessed with masks and obsessed with following these rules, they look at people like me, people like probably many of the people who watch this show, who are a lot more cavalier about running around and, not wearing masks and not quarantining and not doing any of the things that, the government's recommending. And they look at us as these, very careless, awful people. And, it's just that I don't think that we are as careless as people think. I think that there is this kind of understanding that some people have about their own bodies that it's really not going to be that bad for them. The left likes to showcase certain instances of people who said, I don't think that, that COVID is that big of a deal, and then they end up dying, right? The left loves showing that. They have this kind of morbid amusement about it, like, this guy didn't think it was a big deal, and then he died. But the truth is that is a very small percentage of people who actually believe that COVID wasn't going to be that big of a deal for them. For the most part, from at least from the anecdotal evidence that I have, just hearing people talk about this on Twitter, a lot of the people who ran around thinking COVID isn't going to be that severe to me, COVID isn't going to affect me, COVID really didn't affect them that severely. So they were right. And what it looks like here is that maybe there was a good reason that they believed that. Maybe they did have this kind of natural immunity to COVID. Who knows? But the thing that drives me crazy about reading about this study, right, is that the Biden administration was trying to mandate COVID vaccines, and they did not understand this virus. They did not understand how the immune system of regular Americans would potentially be able to fight against this virus. They just thought that they knew better. This is a perfect example of why big government is terrible. This all-controlling authoritarianism of the Biden administration, they are making horrible mistakes in just about every conceivable area of government. They're making mistakes. We do not want them making mistakes with our health, right? Now, I'm not one of these people who think that the vaccines are terrible. I think the vaccines are great. But I also think that there are some side effects. I don't even think that we fully understand the scope of the side effects of the COVID vaccines. And I think that any responsible endocrinologist would tell you the same thing. We really don't fully understand, potential side effects, all the potential negative effects of the vaccines could potentially be. I don't think we really understand that. And so those who are a little bit hesitant to get vaccinated, that is their choice. In my mind, sure, the government could encourage everyone to get vaccinated and could put the data out there and say people who are elderly, whatever side effects come along from these vaccines, they're much less likely to hurt you than COVID will. Because if you're old, you're very vulnerable. If you are very sick, you're very vulnerable. If you're morbidly obese, you're very vulnerable. So, there are certain groups that really should have taken these vaccines. But then for young, healthy people, you got to make your own decisions. And for the government to try to create these mandates, and then when they were not allowed to create these mandates, they basically recommended that private businesses mandate the vaccines, many of which did. Private businesses mandated the vaccine, so many people all over the country got fired from their jobs, a problem about which the Biden administration takes no responsibility. And not only that, but we have these kind of like annoying inconveniences of, we're not allowed into a restaurant unless we're vaccinated. In the government's mind, these were incentives. We're going to incentivize people to get vaccinated by taking away their rights, by taking away their conveniences, by reducing their quality of life. Oh, yeah, no, we're not going to force you to take the vaccine. We're just going to make your life miserable. You want to go to a gym? You want to go out to eat? I'm sorry, you're not vaccinated. You just got to stay in your room and hide and cry and become depressed. What a vicious, nasty thing for the federal government to do. I mean, the Biden administration is despicable as far as I'm concerned. And this proves that those of us who were shouting about this for a long time, talking about how absolutely vicious and nasty the Biden administration is for doing this kind of stuff, this proves that we were right. Because they really didn't know what they were doing. And this is kind of the point that we make when we talk about, freedom of speech on social media, when we talk about the government overreach, the government going too far and demanding certain things that they really should not be demanding. Because we know that they make mistakes and they're not always right. And it looks like this is one of those cases. I'm going to continue reading this. Hold on here. All right, let's go down to this bit here. It says, to complicate matters, genes influence how our immune systems respond to any given virus. In particular, a group of extremely variable genes called the HLA. They hold codes for proteins that allow cells to signal to the immune system that they are infected and need to be killed. In infected cells, HLA proteins can stick to parts of the virus and display them on the outside of a cell like a target. The HLA system is like a mission control for the way the immune system is programmed, says Altman. It's the most varied part of the human genome. Each of us makes different HLA proteins that will display different parts of the virus as targets, and that will prompt the production of immune cells called T cells that attack different parts of the same virus. Earlier studies suggested that people with certain types of HLA genes are less likely to get asymptomatic COVID. Another study identified genetic patterns that leave some vaccinated people prone to severe infection with Omicron. Jeez, let me read that again. Another study identified genetic patterns that leave some vaccinated people prone to severe infection with Omicron. Now, I didn't look at that study, but does that suggest that getting vaccinated actually leaves you more prone to severe infection with Omicron? Let me look that up real quick. I've reached my article limit, so I'd have to subscribe for $1.99 a month to Bloomberg. I really don't want to pay a Bloomberg subscription. Okay, I'm gonna go back. Well, I don't know if what that study says. I haven't looked at that, but that's kind of crazy. But essentially, either it leaves people prone to severe infection with Omicron, like more prone to severe infection, or as prone as if they didn't have the vaccine. It looks like that's what that sentence looks like to me. So that's pretty incredible. So in that case, vaccines would be mandated that are, to some people, completely useless. And yet there is the potential for side effects. Fantastic. Overall, people more prone to one pathogen can be more resistant to others. There's a reason evolution favors diversity for pathogen protection in a way it doesn't for predator protection. Most animals will face the same predators over and over, so they're more likely to pass on their genes if all their offspring have an optimal defense, whether it's their speed or shells or spines or toxins. But pathogens are an ever-shifting threat. So animals that succeed in passing on the most genes are the ones that produce immunologically diverse offspring, thus upping the odds that at least some of them will survive whatever plagues come along. There are also external variables that influence the immune system. For example, animals under certain kinds of stress are more prone to infectious disease. I think humans under stress are more prone to infectious disease, right? It would be wonderful if half of humanity had natural resistance to all past and future variants of SARS-CoV-2, and scientists could study them to figure out how to mimic it, but it may turn out that different people are vulnerable to different variants, that old variants collapse because they run out of susceptible people to infect, but that new variants rise because they've stumbled onto ways to infect those impervious to the last iteration. This might even explain the mystery of why COVID waves rise and fall when they do. A few scientists suggested as early as the autumn of 2020 that human heterogeneity can explain why pandemic surges start to ebb when only a fraction of people have become infected. It's certainly worth figuring out. The only way to effectively fight the virus is to better understand it and us. That's the end of the article. But I want to highlight this point right here. It says, a few scientists suggested as early as the autumn of 2020 that human heterogeneity can explain why pandemic surges start to ebb when only a fraction of people have become infected. So basically, like, you get these surges of infection all over the country, and then they seem to dissipate before there is enough people infected to cause herd immunity, which is when you would expect it to sort of die off, when just about like everyone's been infected. You remember they used to say, like, there's going to be a point where every single person in the world is going to catch COVID. You remember they used to say that? Well, that doesn't seem to happen. What happens is you get this big surge of people with COVID, and then it dies out, and the rest of the country doesn't catch COVID. That seems to be what's been happening. And what it looks like to me, and I don't know if this is right or not, but what it looks like to me is that it's possible that the same people are getting infected over and over again. There may be people that are just highly susceptible to these viruses, and other people that just aren't. Like, I have never caught COVID. I've never caught COVID. Right? I don't have any kind of immunity that I'm aware of, but I've never caught COVID. And there may be a lot of people out there like that who just can't seem to catch COVID. I seem to read about this stuff all the time on Twitter. Lots of people are saying, I've never been vaccinated and I can't seem to catch COVID. Well, if that's the case, then, you know, we have to try to figure out how to protect the people who can catch COVID more effectively. And I think that the argument that we've been making this entire time is that when you quarantine people, you're quarantining people who are infected. That's what a quarantine is. When you quarantine everyone, or when you quarantine the people who are not infected, that's called imprisonment, right? And we're seeing this in China right now. I don't know if you guys have seen the videos out of China. Actually, Tucker covered this last night. I was actually going to do a full video on this, but Tucker already covered it, so I'm not going to. But they're rounding up all the cats in Shanghai, and they're just killing them, I think. That seems to be what they're doing. They're killing all the pets, and they're locking everybody in their apartments right now because they're afraid of some kind of a COVID wave, apparently.
You have 25 million people locked inside their homes. You have the largest prison camp in human history. Anyone who tests positive for COVID is shoved into a van and then taken to a quarantine camp. At this camp, mattresses are strewn on the floor of cells. There's no water. There's just one shared toilet. Just days ago, the inmates you see here were living ordinary lives in their own homes. Now they're in prison. What happened to the lives they left behind? What happened to the dogs and cats they left at home? Well, chances are Chinese police beat those dogs and cats to death on the street. That's happening tonight all over Shanghai, a mass slaughter of pets. So the Chinese government isn't denying this is real, and it's not apologizing. Lang Wanyan is a spokesman for China's National Health Commission. Effectively, he is China's Tony Fauci. He recently gave an interview to the state-run newspaper, the People's Daily, and explained the government's thinking here. Quote, China adheres to COVID zero, he said. China's socialist system has a strong ability to organize and mobilize, which will help it ensure the success of the COVID zero strategy. But what does success look like? Well, this is what success is in Shanghai tonight. This is video shot by a resident of one of Shanghai's countless apartment towers. What you're hearing in this video are the screams of the people trapped inside. Has there ever been a clearer picture of what hell is like? 25 million people imprisoned in concrete apartment blocks, screaming for help and slowly starving.
on social media, videos not verified by NBC News, described as protests by people desperate to get food and medicine. Store shelves cleared out. This man on the street yelling, "What am I supposed to buy? What am I supposed to eat?" In some areas, drones telling people to stay home. Control your soul's desire for freedom, it says.
And in this video, the residents yell at the police at one point. They say, "We are starving."
We are starving, they scream at stony-faced police as drones overhead tell them to stop longing for freedom.
Tucker seems to think that this is all due to some kind of non-election that they're having, which I'm not really sure that explains anything. I don't know why he presented that as a viable motivation for all of this sort of thing. I don't know what they're doing over there, but the excuse for locking people in their apartments is COVID. That is not an excuse for locking people in their apartments. The lockdowns that we had, to me, were unjustifiable. It doesn't appear that many of the recommendations that were made, any of the requirements, any of the measures that were taken, it doesn't seem like much of anything really worked to slow the spread, to flatten the curve, to do whatever it is that they said that they were trying to do. None of it seemed really to be effective. And so a lot of people suffered. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people's businesses went bankrupt. There was a lot of distress that was caused not by the virus, but by the efforts to stop the virus. And, I've been critical since the beginning. Even when Trump was in office and these measures were being taken, I've been critical. To me, it was insane that we ever did the lockdowns. But now this is more evidence to suggest that the government really went out of control. They really became power hungry. They loved that power that they were wielding. And, they became authoritarian. They became authoritarian and they loved it. And as far as I'm concerned, we just have to vote these people out of office. We have to vote out basically every Democrat of every left-wing city in the country. I don't know how that's possible, but we need to get rid of these people. They're awful. There's a great quote by Reagan that I sometimes put at the end of these videos. He says, somebody once said that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the form of liberalism. And what is fascism? Fascism is private enterprise, but total government control. And that seems to be what we've got in America right now. That seems to be what's happened in this country in the last couple of years, what we've shifted toward. Jen Psaki admitted that the White House flags people on Facebook and tells Facebook who they need to censor, who they believe is reporting COVID misinformation, who they believe needs to be silenced, and Facebook listens to them. This is, of course, in flagrant violation of the First Amendment, and yet it's still going on. We live in a fascist society now, ladies and gentlemen. It's what I would call fascist light. It's not pure fascism like what they've got now in Canada, but it's getting there, and that's kind of scary. We've got an election coming up. Hopefully, conservatives don't just take over the House, don't just take over the Senate, but we take over all the local offices as well, because that is extremely important. All right, well, that's it for me. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant. It's just they know so much that is not so. Good night.
Someone very profoundly once said that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism. And what is fascism? Fascism is private enterprise, but total government control and regulation. Well, isn't this the liberal philosophy? The conservative, so-called, is the one that says, less government, get off my back, get out of my pocket, and let me have more control of my own destiny.